Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. Um, got a slight technical problem here. My camera is not working, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to be able to fix that or what. I guess there's a short in the connection. So, so anyway, um, okay, I'll put in the comments that I'm currently unable to get my camera to work, and perhaps it will suddenly start working, or perhaps not. But even if I don't have a camera, I want to um, go live today and talk about what's just happened with Trump bombing Iran and what's led up to it. Um, so anyway. Okay, so yeah, camera's not working. Oh well. Um, so last night, the United States just bombed three nuclear facilities in Iran, and uh, thus the United States has directly entered a conflict with Iran that Israel initiated about 10 days ago with strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, as well as various other places, including apartment buildings where various Iranian military and government officials lived, killing not only Iranian officials, but uh, lots of civilians in the process. I think the initial figure was something like 80 people killed in Israel's initial strike on Tehran. But if you look back over the last few months, it was pretty clear that tensions were rising with Iran, and that Israel really wanted to start a war with Iran. And we didn't know that at the time, but behind the scenes, the Trump administration was going along with that. Um, so Israel um, continued its strikes on Iran, and Iran struck back using uh, its ballistic missiles, which it has far more and better of than Israel does. And in fact, Iran has the capacity, as does any nation with a lot of missiles and drones, etc., to easily overwhelm Israel's or any other missile defense system. And that's exactly what Iran has done. Um, in addition to using newer hypersonic missiles on occasion that uh, even alone are easily able to evade missile defenses. And so the result has been uh, an enormous amount of damage in Israel. Some estimates are in the range of $500 million. So, yeah, sorry. I'm trying to find where I put that estimate. I can at least show you uh, stuff about that. So yeah, there you can see one estimate of the amount of damage that Iran has already done to Israel, and this isn't even including the damage done in Iran's prior attacks, amounting to tens of billions of dollars, but we're clearly paling in comparison to what's happening now. $500 million and counting. And if you look at scenes of destruction in Israel, it's just crazy how much damage has been done. So here's a summary from Hezbollah of high-value targets that have been hit by Iran in its missile strikes. Unit 8200, they're one of their intelligence headquarters, Mossad headquarters, military base in Tel Aviv, the Weizmann Institute of Science, Gavyam Technology Park, many military bases. Of course, Iran and others have struck Israel's main airport, Ben Gurion National Airport, so frequently that it has been closed for quite some time. Israelis can't even leave by plane out of Israel's main airport. There you see a picture of some of the severe damage, just a few glimpses of what's happening in Israel. And as you may know, Israel is attempting to censor as much footage as possible of what's going on. So they're threatening people with prison sentences if they're caught filming missiles in the sky, or landing on their targets, or if they film scenes of damage, which Israeli officials argue might give away targeting information to to Iran. Now, mind you, Iran has lots of ways to get information about where these missiles have struck. So it's, I mean, if you have any indication of where a missile has landed from whatever source, you can figure out where that is. And in reality, lots of information about where Iranian missiles have struck is publicly available. There was a journalist at the Washington Post that, of course, was attacked by Zionists for doing this, who sorry, I was trying to get rid of my blank image there so you could see the whole screen, but it didn't work. And as I said earlier, I'm presently unable to get my camera to work. There seems to be a short in the cable or something. So I apologize for that. But let's see, where was I? So, yeah, in general, as I said, Israel has been attacking Iran for 10 days or so now. the U.S. just directly joined the attacks, but has been indirectly involved all along. But why did this happen? What are the claims about why it happened, and how do those claims stand up to reality? And what's the evidence for Israel's and the U.S.'s claims about why they felt compelled to attack Iran? I see some people just joined, and if you are just now joining, my apologies, but my camera isn't working, so I'm doing this without you seeing my pretty face. But I'm gonna go ahead and show you images of some of the voluminous amount of material that I've collected over the past 10 days. This strike has been, this conflict between Israel and Iran, with the United States backing Israel to the hilt the entire time, and now directly joining. And okay, well, how did we get here? Interestingly, just a few days ago, Trump administration sources claimed that they won't join the war unless Iran targets Americans. And of course, that didn't happen. Up until this point, Iran has not attacked any American targets, such as in numerous bases in the region. But the U.S. Entered the conflict directly, using B-2 bombers to strike Iranian military sites with very large bombs, 30,000-pound bombs. And by the way, the strikes haven't caused an enormous amount of damage. They really were far short of what would be needed to destroy nuclear facilities buried hundreds of feet underground, as these key facilities of the Iranian nuclear program are. So Scott Ritter argued that this at least was intended as kind of a, well, we have to save face, so we're gonna launch an attack, but we're not trying to start a major war. So Ritter says, and Scott Ritter, of course, is a former UN weapons inspector, and lead negotiator or lead investigator of Soviet military capacities during the period when various arms control treaties were enacted, and now for the past several years a geopolitical analyst. And so Scott, who has a long military career to an intelligence career, to kind of, as well as understanding of arms control, he has the credentials to make often or usually pretty accurate predictions of what's going to happen, or what the implications are of this or that military issue. And his view on Trump's attack is It was an act of theater. Trump's big mouth, where, for instance, he threatened to assassinate Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. I have no idea how to say that correctly. You know, he said they were going to assassinate him. Basically, he said that the U.S. was going to destroy Iran's "quote-unquote" nuclear program, and that they needed to surrender, etc. So Scott goes on to say, Trump's big mouth, as I mentioned, had boxed him into a corner. Iran wouldn't play his game, and I'll talk more about what he means by that in a minute. So he had to bomb Iran to save face. He bombed 2 empty nuclear facilities that had previously been struck by Israel. And he bounced 6 bombs off an indestructible facility, Firdos, claiming destruction despite the opposite being the case. Now, I assume Scott doesn't mean that this facility, which is the most deeply underground and reinforced, I don't think he literally means that it's indestructible, but it's extremely hard for any weapons, including tactical nuclear weapons, to reach it. So he goes on to say, that's it, a contained strike, a nothing burger. And this is a man whose supporters call him the greatest leader in the world. He's a national disgrace. He is a national disgrace, but given the context here, it seems like a bit of a weird context in which to bring it up, because of course he's not a national disgrace because he conducted a strike that amounted to a lot less, in terms of the damage that it did than he claims the U.S. was going to do. I wouldn't say it's a nothing burger, certainly, in terms of possible outcomes of this. Iran's parliament has just voted to close the Strait of Hormuz. This area right here, at the entrance to the Persian Gulf, and there's lots of other countries around here that are major oil producers that have to ship their oil out through the Strait of Hormuz. So, as Brian Krasenstein, a Democratic functionary, even he understands this, and many other people have observed, 20% of global oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, and this could cause, as he points out, a colossal spike in oil prices, and therefore, since so much about the economy depends on gas and oil prices, inflation will skyrocket. So he says potential $5 to $7 a gallon range, depending on duration. Could go a lot higher than that, depending on duration. Risk of military escalation. Tanker delays affect oil, liquid natural gas, and related goods. Thanks, Trump. Indeed. Thanks, Trump. Now, contrary to what of some of our Democratic friends' reaction to this is, it's all Jill Stein's fault, according to shitlib Democrats. So this guy says, we told you guys not to waste your vote on Jill Stein, and especially not vote for Trump, but y'all wanted cheap groceries. Now look where we are. Groceries still expensive as fuck, and now this. Well, dude, First of all, um, maybe you should have paid attention to what Kamala Harris's actual stands were on uh, Iran and Israel and so forth. Of course, Harris very much supported both the Israeli uh, genocide in Gaza, which is a major reason why she lost the election, and in addition, has extremely bellicose sentiments toward Iran. Let's see. Sorry, that isn't actually the best. Um, as Jason Call from the Green Party points out, Kamala Harris has said in the past that Iran is the greatest adversary of the U.S. Democratic presidential candidate says preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapon is one of her top priorities. So, how do you suppose Kamala Harris would have gone about that if she had been elected president? Would she have done anything any differently than Donald Trump? Just not necessarily in terms of specifics, but generally speaking, uh, there's no evidence whatsoever that that's the case. Um, so, whether or not the U.S. goes to war simply doesn't depend in any discernible way on which party holds the White House or has the majority in Congress. So, in case people have forgotten, the U.S. entered the Korean War, despite having a Democratic president. With a Democrat, Harry Truman was president. I'm pretty sure the Dems had a majority in Congress at the time. Didn't stop that war. Vietnam, obviously, Democrats were in the White House when that started, and for much of the early years of the war. Democrats, the majority of Democrats voted for, in the Senate at least, voted for the Iraq War. Almost, a sizable minority, almost the majority, voted for the Iraq War in the House. And the list goes on. Democrats and Republicans are, if you look at history, clearly warmongers to the same extent, and are also supporters of Israel to roughly the same extent. So there's a faction of maybe a couple dozen Democrats in the House, and a handful in the Senate, a handful of Republicans in both the House and Senate who haven't taken bribes from the Israel lobby, but they're few and far between. And even they, although certainly they're condemning this attack on Iran, there's a resolution invoking the War Powers Act because Trump attacked Iran without getting congressional approval or even notifying Congress for the most part in advance. So basically, the take of people like Bernie Sanders and AOC and so on and so forth is, for the most part, that this was a violation of U.S. law, and that it's a quote unquote mistake in terms of all sorts of possible negative outcomes that could result, such as attacks on our military bases and retaliation by Iran. And that might be happening already. I haven't heard yet. Um, and just a greater escalation in the conflict with results like uh, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. That you know, if it's for a prolonged period of time, as you know, Mohammed Marandi, frequent Iranian guest, Professor Marandi, frequent Iranian guest on uh, a slew of both independent and mainstream media outlets. He has said that we could be looking at an economic calamity, the likes of which none of us have seen in our lifetimes, and that even goes for people who were alive during the Great Depression. If a sort of a worst case scenario, short of all-out nuclear war, we could be looking at just a colossal economic calamity. Even if this goes on for a short time, there certainly will be a lot of adverse negative economic consequences. And of course, in the region itself, particularly in Iran and Israel, there will be enormous economic damage directly, as well as loss of life, injuries, etc. So but what you won't hear from most of these Democrats who oppose this is that uh, there was never any evidence that Iran was making a bomb. So I highly recommend watching Richard Medhurst's work to see why the so-called weapons of mass destruction allegation against Iran that it was building, in the case of some of the coverage on Fox News allegedly already has nuclear weapons. So Andy Boreham summarizes all this pretty succinctly, but again, please go check out a segment by Richard Medhurst, specifically covering the complete lack of evidence that Iran has any sort of nuclear weapons program. So just to go through the history of this a little bit, Iran and the U.S., when Obama was president in 2015, signed a nuclear treaty that you put strict limitations on the extent to which Iran could enrich uranium, and called for basically what the International Atomic Energy was actually doing, frequent and unannounced inspections by the Atomic Energy Agency of any of Iran's nuclear facilities, and in return, the U.S. was supposed to drop sanctions on Iran, but it never did that. The sanctions in Iran remained in place. Despite that, Iran stuck to the agreement, the JCPOA agreement, which I forget now what that stands for, Joint Committee something something something, between Iran and the United States and several other countries that would have, under the terms of the agreement, made it impossible for Iran to pursue nuclear weapons, which they gave there was no evidence that they were trying to develop nuclear weapons anyway. But so, as Richard Medhurst documents exhaustively, Iran held up their end of the bargain. They confirmed that their nuclear facilities were peaceful means, such as power, i.e., power generation. They allowed nuclear inspectors from the Atomic Energy Agency in, as they were already required to do by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which they had already signed. And Israel, on the other hand, refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or consequently have their nuclear facilities inspected. And it's almost universally believed, based on intelligence information and sort of inadvertent confessions from Israeli officials from time to time, that Israel already has nuclear weapons. We don't know how many. Of course, the U.S. has nuclear weapons and has actually used them in combat. So the idea that Iran poses some sort of nuclear threat when its nuclear facilities have been constantly inspected, it's signed on to both the International Non-Proliferation Treaty and the specific agreement negotiated between itself and several Western and non-Western countries back in 2015. It had abided by that agreement strictly until Donald Trump pulled out of the agreement unilaterally in, I believe it was 2018. And so at that point, when the U.S. not only just didn't stick to its end of the agreement by removing sanctions on Iraq, but actually formally quit the agreement, Iran continued to abide by the agreement for a full year afterwards. Basically, sending the message to the United States: look, we're willing to abide by the agreement, and we still are, but you need to lift the sanctions. Otherwise, why will we keep to our end of a bargain where you have reneged on the agreement completely? Formally just torn it up, as Trump did. And then, of course, throughout this period, up until the conflict began, the war and genocide in Gaza began. Throughout that time, both Israel and the United States periodically attacked Iran or Iranians. Israel carried out numerous strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, assassinated nuclear scientists, assassinated military officials, and Trump, of course, assassinated a highly popular Iranian military leader, General Qasem Soleimani, in January of 2020. So while all of this is going on, Iran is gradually saying, okay, well, if you don't, A, stop attacking us, and B, remove sanctions against us as called for by this agreement that you signed and then you unilaterally left, if you continue along this path, then we're going to do X. And X involved things like upping the proportion of enrichment of uranium from, I think it was 3.5%, somewhere in there, the concentration of uranium that Iran was allowed to enrich to under the JCPOA agreement between it, the United States, and other actors. So they're like, okay, we're going to enrich to 5%. Are you sure you don't want to come back into the agreements and lift the sanctions on us? Because we thought that you wanted some kind of agreement to make sure we didn't develop a nuclear weapon. Our leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, announced back in the early 2000s that both for moral and practical reasons, Iran had no intention of developing a nuclear program, and there was no evidence that it was doing so. Again, see Richard Medhurst for voluminous evidence that this was the case. And so Iran kept going. Every 60 days, I believe it was, they would step back a little further from this agreement that the U.S. had already left. So, enriching uranium up to 20% and putting more centrifuges, which are used for uranium enrichment online, and modernizing them, and then eventually upping the maximum amount they enriched uranium to 60%, which is still well short of the 90% required to develop a nuclear weapon, but closer to it. And again, the whole time saying, we are not trying to develop nuclear weapons. There's no you can't find any evidence that we are trying to develop nuclear weapons, and we don't believe that we should, because we believe in the principles of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But in the meantime, to some extent, over the last 3 decades, Israel and the United States and other Western actors have been claiming Iran was on the verge of developing nuclear weapons. They were days away, or weeks away, or months away. Sometimes even folks said that they were like 3 or 4 years away, and portrayed that as some sort of threat, as if Iran, being that far away from developing a nuclear weapon and having there being no indication that it was actually moving forward with it. And in the meantime, Israel has nuclear weapons. The United States has nuclear weapons. The U.S. has actually used nuclear weapons. Israel, by its behavior over the course of its history, has made it pretty clear they have no red lines, and if the circumstances in their view warranted it, they certainly wouldn't hesitate to use nuclear weapons. But somehow, Iran's not allowed to have nuclear weapons, but Israel is, and the United States is. It's just utter hypocrisy. So, a central figure in this whole story is Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, who, as presumably you're all aware, ran for president in 2019, was a member of Congress from 2013 till the beginning of 2021, and throughout much of her time in Congress, posed as an opponent of regime change wars, as she called them. That was kind of her brand, was opposing U.S. intervention in Syria and Iran, of course, and basically almost everywhere else. She criticized U.S. coup attempts or successes in Bolivia and Venezuela and other places. She even knows a fair bit about Iranian history and knows that the U.S. Overthrew Iran's elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh, prime minister in the early 1950s, in 1953, and replaced him with a U.S. pawn, the dictator Shah Pahlavi, who ruled Iran with an iron fist for 3.5 decades. But now suddenly, she has, I'll get to that in a minute. She's basically backed this latest intervention. But prior to that, back in March, Tulsi Gabbard testified before Congress based on a report put together by the intelligence agencies that she supervises as the Director of National Intelligence, saying Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized a nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003. The intelligence community is monitoring if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program, but the unspoken implication was so far they're not.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program.
But that was Tulsi in March. Here's Tulsi now, lying about what she said in March. So, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard tweeted this: "The dishonest media is intentionally taking my testimony out of context and spreading fake news as a way to manufacture division. America has intelligence that Iran is at the point that it can produce a nuclear weapon within weeks to months if they decide to finalize the assembly. President Trump has been clear that can't happen, and I agree." Well, why can't it happen, Tulsi? I mean, you seem to be okay with Israel, which has been the only country in the region, besides Iraq way back in the 90s, to engage in an unprovoked attacks on other countries, including now committing genocide in Gaza for the past 20 months or so. But you're worried about Iran potentially developing nuclear weapons when there's no indication that they would use them, and there's no indication that they've been trying to produce a nuclear weapon. But it's okay for Israel to have them. Okay. All right. She says, "My full testimony below." Let's see whether this testimony actually fits with what she's saying here. I mean, with what she's saying here in this tweet.
Iran continues to seek expansion of its influence in the Middle East, despite the degradation to its proxies and defenses during the Gaza conflict. Iran has developed and maintains ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and UAVs, including systems capable of striking U.S. targets and allies in the region.
Okay, now is that illegal, Tulsi? Is it illegal for Iran to develop missiles? No, of course not.
Tehran has shown a willingness to use these weapons, including during a 2020 attack on U.S. forces in Iraq and in attacks.
Okay, so, all right, so I hadn't actually watched this full segment before, so I'm reacting to it as we go along here, but she's omitting the fact that the reason Iran struck U.S. military targets in 2020 is that the U.S., that Trump, had just assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, among others, based on the same, ruse that they deployed this time, where they pretended to negotiate with Iran. They called for a meeting involving Soleimani and various officials from other countries in Iraq, and that was a pretext to assassinate. That was a pretext to get him to a place where they could assassinate him, which they did. And likewise, this recent set of negotiations that took place between Iran and the U.S., which basically were about the possibility of re-implementing something similar to the JCPOA, which Trump had unilaterally left back during his first term. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Okay. At the time that this happened, and I did a segment on this on YouTube back in January of 2020, Tulsi Gabbard was harshly critical of Trump for the assassination plot, for the assassination of Soleimani. Characterized it as an unprovoked act of aggression. And at the time, she didn't particularly react to Iran retaliating because why wouldn't they? Of course, they're going to retaliate for unprovoked aggression. Okay, but she just glosses over, not only that context, but where she stood at the time.
Against Israel in April and October 2024. Iran's cyber operations and capabilities also present a serious threat to U.S. network. Iran's cyber operations and capabilities against Israel in April and October 2024. 20 attack on U.S. forces in Iraq and in attacks against Israel in April and October 2024.
Again, failing to mention that these attacks on Israel last year were in retaliation for Israel attacking Iran or Iranian individuals, as they did when they bombed the Iranian consulate in Syria. She doesn't mention here, but those were retaliations for that. So I guess you can already see, in fact, in her testimony back in March, how she's already moved away from the stance that she took back in the late 2010s of opposing U.S. intervention. Now, I, among others, at the time that she was running for president, without, in my case at least, without endorsing her for president or anything, and making a number of criticisms of her, I pointed out, look, she's been opposed to U.S. intervention in Syria the entire time she's been in Congress, since 2013. She has frequently expressed opposition and put legislation forward against, opposing U.S. interventions in various other countries. She spoke out when Israel attacked the peaceful protesters at a Great March of Return in 2018. She frequently, basically all 5 of her last 5 years in Congress, she voted against the U.S. military budget. She positioned herself during the 2019-2020 presidential campaign as the anti-regime change candidate within the Democratic Party. Certainly, she could say with justification that she had been more anti-war than Bernie Sanders, certainly, who, over the course of his congressional career, has supported many a U.S. military intervention, and at times voted in favor of the military budget. At least during her last few years in Congress, Tulsi Gabbard was pretty consistent in opposing U.S. military intervention. She kind of waffled a bit on Israel, said she was against their acts of aggression, like the assault on the Great Peaceful Grace March of Return that killed over 200. But at the same time, she expressed opposition to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, although she didn't support legislation declaring it illegal. So, kind of a mixed bag on Israel. But in general, at that time, the late 2010s, when she was in Congress and she ultimately ran for president, she presented herself and acted on that presentation in terms of her legislative record and her public statements, as an opponent of regime change wars. And now she's done a complete 180. And somebody put together a thread of I think it was like 15 tweets that she had made, during that time frame, the last couple of years that Trump was in office, repeatedly opposing Trump's efforts to intervene in Iran. And now, as of the last few days, she's suddenly come out 100% for it. As with this tweet. Okay, let's go through the rest of her testimony here.
Iran's cyber operations and capabilities also present a serious threat to U.S. networks and data. The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program. In the past year, we've seen an erosion of a decades-long taboo in Iran on discussing nuclear weapons in public, likely emboldening nuclear weapons advocates within Iran's decision-making apparatus. Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is at its highest levels and is unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons. Iran will likely continue efforts to counter Israel and press for U.S. military withdrawal from the region by aiding, arming, and helping to reconstitute its loose consortium of like-minded terrorists and militant actors, which it refers to as its axis of resistance.
Okay, now she never would have called people, she wouldn't have used that terminology, that anybody who opposes Israel in the U.S. or terrorists, back in the late 2010s when she was presenting herself as anti-war and especially anti-regime change war. So quite a contrast. But of course, as I've talked a lot about on this show in the past, it's just an enormous double standard to portray acts of aggression by Iran or Hamas or Hezbollah or others in the region, Yemen, in response to Israeli or U.S. aggression, such as the Israeli attack on Gaza and subsequent genocide, but many other unprovoked attacks in the past, and the military occupation or siege, if you don't want to use the term occupation, in the case of Gaza since 2007, when Israel surrounded it on all sides and controlled everything that went in and out and kept a lot of stuff from coming in that people in Gaza needed. And, hence the reason for the October 7th attack by Hamas and other military actors, people like Tulsi and others, other U.S. establishment figures try to portray Hamas's armed wing as the only force opposing Israel and portray them as terrorists, when in fact it was a military operation. October 7th was a military operation designed to attack the international law. The UN calls it an occupation, but call it a economic blockade or siege, if you like, instead of Israel on Gaza, where, for instance, often wouldn't let anybody leave Gaza, even for necessary medical care that they couldn't, because of the economic sanctions, get in Gaza. But you won't hear that from even the most at one time liberal members of the political establishment, like Tulsi Gabbard or Bernie Sanders, that there are legitimate reasons why Iran and its allies engage in military actions. The Israeli occupation, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and now genocide. The whole ball of wax that Israel and its allies unjustly perpetrate on the people of the region. So all of that's to say that Tulsi Gabbard, for whatever reason, has evolved from portraying herself as anti-war a few years ago, or at least anti-regime change war, where she was saying, as you can see there, just harshly criticizing Trump for his attacks on Iran. And now she, of course, is thoroughly embedded in the warmongering establishment. And folks like Ben Norton, whose work I very much like and admire, think that all along this was just a cynical ruse to sell herself to the public. But I mean, if you look at her legislative record over those last few years in Congress, you look at her public statements before she ran for president, she was a pretty consistent voice against much of U.S. Military intervention. So I think there's been a genuine. This is just my opinion. I wonder what you guys think. I think that at the time, she sincerely saw that things like U.S. Instigation of and involvement in what a lot of people have, I think, mistakenly portrayed as a civil war in Syria. It was, from the beginning, as Tulsi Gabbard was one of the people made clear, a regime change operation, which ultimately succeeded in overthrowing Bashar al-Assad. About 12 years after it began in 2011, or 13 years after it began in 2011. She was. There was nothing about what she said or did during her time in office that suggested that she didn't strongly oppose U.S. intervention in Syria and say it wasn't serving U.S. interests, and it was certainly hurting the Syrian people quite a lot. She was clear about that, and she called out the U.S. establishment and proposed legislation calling for the ending of U.S. covert operations supporting terrorists in Syria, supporting affiliates of Al Qaeda and ISIS. She talked about that openly back then. She does not now. Now she says that Hamas are the terrorists, that Iran are the terrorists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And granted, she didn't back then refrain from portraying Iran in this light that the U.S. establishment does, but at least she also criticized the other side back then. She doesn't now. Another pretext for Israeli and U.S. intervention in Iran and elsewhere, but mainly with regard to Iran, is the supposed status of women in Iran. So the claim is that Iran, one of the rationales besides Iran has, as Fox News has claimed, or is developing, as now even Tulsi Gabbard, who didn't make that claim back in March, at least she waffled on it, is now making that Iran is trying to acquire weapons of mass destruction. The exact same rationale that George Bush and his allies gave for the Iraq War, which of course Tulsi Gabbard, having been a participant in it as a soldier, came to harshly criticize and to call out the fact that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction. Now she's saying she supports Trump's efforts to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, even though back in March she said there's no evidence, according to her own, according to the intelligence agencies that she supervises, there was no evidence that they were trying to develop them at that time. But in addition to there being no more evidence that Iran is committed to developing a nuclear weapon, so they might now that they've been attacked. North Korea has nuclear weapons. It's not been attacked. Libya didn't develop, abandon its nuclear program, and Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown. So, a lot of countries in the world are looking at those and other examples and concluding, well, if we don't want to be attacked by the United States, maybe we'd better develop a nuclear weapon ourselves. And certainly there's a lot more talk about that in Iran than there was previously. So they might very well do exactly what the U.S. and Israel falsely claim they initiated these attacks for in order to prevent. So they are possibly going to achieve the exact opposite of what their false stated objectives are, as far as that goes. But anyway, as I was getting to, another claim that is used as a propaganda justification for attacking Iran is Iran supposedly being this repressive hellhole for women. And the central claim, as far as that goes, is the claim that Iranian women are forced to wear a hijab by the government. And if they don't, then they will inevitably be thrown in jail or something like that. Well, it is true that there are laws on the books that require women to wear a hijab, but there's certainly no requirement that Iranian women wear a hijab. And if I'm not mistaken, I seem to recall Iran. Let me look this up, but I think it might be the case that Iran is one of the countries where burqas, the more restrictive clothing that covers everything except a woman's eyes, that they are not even allowed in Iran. Let me look this up to make sure, but countries where burqa is banned. Okay, it's not a place where burqas are banned, but I've in collating material for this segment, I looked at a lot of videos of the streets of Tehran and other places in Iran, smaller cities or small towns in Iran, and I never once saw a woman wearing a burqa. It's just not something that women in Iran typically wear at all. But this is a video clip taken in Tehran, and there are many others like this, both in Tehran and elsewhere, that you can easily find just by searching on YouTube, that show that many women in Iran don't cover their hair or face in public. And in fact, some Iranian women, younger Iranian women, as you can see there in the picture, dress a lot like a lot of young American women, wear tops with a bare midriff.
Iran.
There's some wearing a hijab. Look at all these women not wearing a hijab in downtown Tehran. Some are, but the majority are not. Supposedly, this draconian ban on women not covering their hair was obviously often not enforced. And what I found when I looked at videos from small towns in Iraq is that most of the women were wearing hijabs, but some of them weren't. Regardless of where I've looked in my searches so far, you always saw some women not wearing hijabs. You never saw women wearing burqas, no matter where you looked. And in major urban areas, the majority of women in Iran do not wear hijabs. Thought I had. Yeah, I know what it is. I wanted to show you. Probably by far the most frequent Iranian guests on both alternative media outlets and mainstream media programs. The most frequent guest from Iran on various news outlets is Mohammad Marandi, a professor of English literature at Tehran University, and I thought I had his comments about this attack on women, but let's see. I mean, his comments about these claims about Iranian women. Okay, I'm not finding it right now, but in any case, Dr. Marandi and many others have made the point that even if it were actually true that Iran enforces a strict dress code on all Iranian women that forces them to cover their hair, which, as you've just seen, is not the case, even though there certainly have been incidents of the so-called morality police enforcing the hijab mandate. But most of the time they don't. It's kind of like how marijuana use has been treated here in the United States for a long time, where for the most part, in states where it's illegal, laws against possession of marijuana have long not been enforced by law enforcement officials. But then sometimes, particularly against people of color, they do enforce the laws. So there's inconsistency. And same in Iran. But as you saw, most women, at least in major urban areas, don't wear hijabs in public. But Professor Morandi points out, and I wish I knew where his comment was, but he points out that women are very highly educated in Iran and have a lot of opportunities career-wise. So even if it were true that there was a strict dress code requiring women to wear a hijab, which on the books there is, but in practice there isn't. But even if it were true, what's far more important about the status of women in Iraq is that unlike in places like Afghanistan, women have enormous opportunities educationally and career-wise. The vast majority of science and technology, STEM field, science, technology, and engineering graduates from Iranian universities and Iranian graduate programs are, in fact, women. Women, Dr. Morandi shared in one of his several appearances on Piers Morgan's show that Iran, in his English department at the University of Tehran, his department chairperson for the entire time he's been there, more than 2 decades, has been a woman, one or another woman. So it just isn't true that Iran represses women to the extent that is portrayed here in the West. That certainly isn't to say that there isn't a long way to go in Iran, like in many parts of the world, including the United States for that matter, as far as the status of women is concerned. Certainly there's repression of the rights of people who are homosexual in Iran. Being openly homosexual is something that is, basically, gay and lesbian people are discriminated against Iran to a greater extent than they are in much of the West. Is that a reason to bomb people? Is it helping Iranian women get rid of the law about hijabs to kill them? How is that helping? Obviously, it's not. So, what is this war really about? It's not about the status of women. It's not about Iran's non-existent weapons of mass destruction. It's not about their non-existent support for terrorism, when in fact what they're supporting is a rebellion by indigenous people of a colonizing entity, the state of Israel. That's not to say that there haven't been either deliberate or careless attacks on civilians by forces opposing the state of Israel. There have been, but as we can see from investigations of what happened on October 7th in the Hamas-led uprising against Israel, those are isolated incidents. There was no evidence from October 7th that Palestinians were trying to rape any Israeli women. No victim testimony, no forensic evidence, etc. And in fact, the evidence actually indicates that Israeli men, in the military or in prisons, are highly likely, and sometimes women too, are highly likely to rape Palestinian women who are in custody. Israel itself, in general, has a high rate of rape of Israeli women. And, of course, on October 7th, not only is there no evidence for these outrageous claims like, Palestinians supposedly beheaded babies or burned babies. Only 2 babies died on October 7th. And all these claims about supposed widespread massacres of civilians by Hamas-led Palestinian forces, just no evidence that happened. In fact, the evidence suggests that, if anything, the majority of the civilians who died on October 7th were killed by Israeli either just overzealous use of massive firepower or deliberate targeting of both kidnapped Israelis and their Palestinian captors, under the so-called Hannibal Directive, where Israel deliberately kills its own people in order to prevent them from being taken hostage and used as bargaining chips to get the far, 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 far greater number of Palestinian prisoners held without charge or justification released. And certainly, as I said, no support that the status of women in Iran is anything like what it is in Afghanistan or in Syria nowadays, where they now have imposed a very strict dress code on women and are making moves to restrict their educational and economic opportunities. Syria is now, like Afghanistan, a hellhole for women. Iran is not. But of course, these pretexts are all bullshit. The reality is that Iran is being attacked because of its support for Palestinians and forces in the region, such as Hezbollah, opposing Israel's assault on the Palestinians and opposing their aggression against neighboring countries like Lebanon. And more broadly, the attack on Iran represents an attempt to weaken not merely the axis of resistance, but the whole coalition of countries involved in such structures as BRICS, trying to develop independently, economically independently of the United States. Really what's behind this is an attempt to get at not only Iran, but its close allies, China, which gets 90% of its oil from Iran, and Russia, which doesn't get oil from Iran, but has a close alliance with Iran economically and militarily. Let's see. Motives for U.S. involvement. Was Ali Al-Ghanima of Electronic Intifada argues it's very clear that the Zionist genocide regime's aggression against Iran and now U.S. Aggression against Iran, has nothing to do with the nuclear program. It's an attempt to collapse the state, like Syria, Libya, and Iraq. So if you recall, back in the early 2000s, as General Wesley Clark later said publicly on network television, there was a plan developed by the Bush administration and its allies to overthrow 7 governments in the region that were allied with the Palestinians. Syria, Libya, Iraq, Lebanon, Sudan, and blanking on the other African country that was part of this list, and finally Iran. And in the other 6 cases, the U.S. and its allies have either overthrown governments allied with the Palestinians, such as those of Syria, Libya, and Iraq, or destabilized them and divided them, thus weakening the capacity of those states to support the Palestinians. So in Lebanon, you have a very divided nation where, on the one hand, Hezbollah is very politically powerful and has the largest and most powerful non-state military force in the world. But on the other hand, you have strong forces in Lebanon that are loyal puppets of the U.S. But in any case, Iran is part of the so-called axis of resistance, and in fact, by far the most militarily and economically powerful nation that is part of what is now or was the axis of resistance. So as Ben Norton states, the real goals of the U.S. and Israeli war on Iran are to increase U.S. hegemony in West Asia by overthrowing the last of those 7 governments that support the axis of resistance, colonize Palestine, save the petrodollar system, prevent de-dollarization, the world's reliance on the dollar as a reserve currency, divide BRICS, and break up the Iran-Russia-China partnership. And in addition, let's see, I'm not sure whether I'll be able to find the stuff I documented about this, but I'll just tell you about it. Recently, a rail line was completed connecting Iran, Russia, and among other countries with China. China has an economic agreement with Iran involving several $100 billion overall of investment in economic development that would be mutually beneficial to both countries that this rail line was part of. And so now Iran is no longer dependent on shipping oil and other things to China by sea. They can ship it on land, and similarly, China can ship goods to Iran without relying on the sea route. So the U.S. feels very threatened by this because the U.S. can't very well impose a naval blockade on a rail line. So ultimately, this is as much about attempt to disrupt Iran's and the BRICS countries overall. BRICS stands originally for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but has since been expanded to include several other countries, including Iran, in this economic and political alliance that, among other things, is trying to well, just in general, is trying to develop economic independence from the United States. And really, that's what this all boils down to, is that any country that's a sovereign nation, whether it be Cuba or Iran or China, Russia, regardless of political systems, such as whether they're socialists or not, regardless of anything else, any country that is not under the U.S.'s thumb is deemed by the U.S. to be a threat, and efforts to undermine their sovereignty, destabilize them, impede their economic developments. That's what the U.S.'s foreign policy is all about, is attacking nations that are pursuing or have considerable sovereignty, considerable independence from the United States. And that's a lot of what this all boils down to. And of course, secondarily, but really fitting into this overall picture, the U.S. and its allies are trying to prevent countries from cooperating and liberating Palestinians from Israeli oppression, and in general, liberating the region from Israeli aggression and dominance. That's a threat, of course, to the fact that there is this axis of resistance is a threat to U.S. economic and political domination of the region. Well, where is this all going to go? Well, I showed you a guesstimate from Democratic operative Brian Krasenstein, who certainly is not one inclined to criticize the U.S. government for its foreign policy, but he's pointing out the fact that Iran has elected to try and block the Strait of Hormuz, which they have succeeded in doing for a brief period of time in the past, has possibly staggeringly deleterious economic consequences. Massive spikes in inflation, disruption of the world's energy supplies, and an economic meltdown, basically. Mohammed Marandi, the professor of English literature, who's a frequent international political commentator from Iran, makes even more dire predictions, saying that and I assume he means if this goes on for a while, that Iranian actions, whether it be blocking the Strait of Hormuz and cutting oil traffic by sea through the region, or attacking oil facilities of various Persian Gulf states, etc., that could wreck the global economy to an extent worse than the Great Depression. So that's one of the possibilities that Trump has set up for us here. Trump and Netanyahu and the U.S. and Israeli political establishments and their allies have set up here the possibility of the next worst thing to all-out nuclear war that could happen to us. A complete economic meltdown exceeding the Great Recession in 2008 or the Great Depression of 1929 through the 30s. Heaven forbid that doesn't happen, but that's a real risk. And in addition to that, it has to be pointed out that in response to Trump's equally insane and maybe not quite as potentially calamitous, but almost attempts at trade war on China and much of the rest of the world, but principally China, a consequence of that was that China banned shipments of refined or developed rare earth minerals to the United States military or military contractors. In general, I mean, it was going to impose a general ban for these manufactured products that have components of rare earth minerals that are necessary in pretty much all the electronics we have, certainly including the electronics used in developing weapons systems and weaponry used to convey them, such as airplanes, ships, and so forth. So China has the power because they control 90% of the processing of rare earth minerals at this point in time, and the U.S. is deindustrialized, so the U.S. certainly isn't going to change that anytime soon. They can prevent the U.S. military from manufacturing new weapons if they want to. So China has that power, and the U.S. is at this point at their mercy. And of course, people like Trump and his allies act like they're oblivious to all this. Now, I'm sure behind the scenes, some people have, I hope, shared with Trump what the potential economic consequences of his actions and Israel's actions are, or what the consequences could be for U.S. industry, including the military-industrial complex. Hopefully, he's aware of that, and hopefully we'll see what Scott Ritter predicts of this being largely a symbolic act that hasn't severely damaged Iran's nuclear program. Hasn't so far, according to Iranian officials, resulted in radioactive leakage, and hopefully this won't escalate out of hand and become a full-blown regional war where those calamitous consequences that I've talked about, economically as well as in terms of loss of life and injury and so forth. Hopefully, this doesn't spiral to the point that things that I'm talking about actually happen. But we'll see. We'll see. But one last thing that I wanted to mention, just to end us on a lighter note, is just the hilarious trolling of Zionists, of Israelis and their Zionist allies. It's just astonishing. Let's see. Okay, so you'll recall, if you've been following events closely over the past year and a half, that when Hamas and its allies, I'm not sure which it was, or Al-Qassam brigades, I should say, and their allies, were accused by Israel of putting military facilities in civilian structures, including hospitals. And Israel claimed that Hamas had a military base underneath the first hospital that it attacked in Gaza, Al-Shifa Hospital, and never produced any evidence to that effect. And then went on when it invaded Lebanon, and as it does everywhere it goes, largely massacred civilians and damaged civilian infrastructure rather than having any sort of military objective, and occupying, at least temporarily, land in Lebanon. And in the course of this, Israel and one of its many false claims was that Iranian civilians were storing missiles in their houses. So, in an attempt to kind of troll Israelis for this propaganda, people opposing Israeli genocide and regional aggression created the same sort of AI created propaganda that Israel did. So claim that in Israeli apartment complexes, Israel was storing F-30 fighters, F-35 fighters, rockets, naval vessels, including submarines, and a starship, battle destroyer from the movie Star Wars. So an obvious parody. But you have idiot Zionists like this guy, Dr. Eli David, who didn't get the joke, and thought that supporters of Iran or opponents of Israel were seriously trying to claim that Israel stores F-35s, submarines, spaceships, etc., in residential apartment buildings. Of course, nobody seriously believes that that's the case, but these morons, who are justifying a genocide, are so intellectually feeble that they can't even detect the most blatant possible sarcasm. And there were many other tweets just like this. Just hilariously stupid. Okay, well, anyway, I've got to go do stuff, so I will sign off for now. But hopefully I will be able to get my camera fixed or get a new one if I have to. But in any case, hopefully, just I'm not a praying person, but if I was, I'd be praying that these reckless actions by Israel and the United States and their allies don't result in all sorts of calamitous scenarios unfolding. But unfortunately, that could very well happen. So if you're not screaming at the top of your lungs in opposition to this nonsense and insanity now, please do so, because not only the well-being of people in Iran and Palestine and elsewhere, but our own is at stake here. And let's make no mistake about it. You would probably be in a similar place if Kamala Harris had been elected instead of Donald Trump. It's just the entire U.S. political establishment that is wedded to this war at all costs, eschew diplomacy approach to the world, where they have no perspective on the extent to which the U.S.'s economic and political and military power relative to the rest of the world has declined over the years. So these desperate attempts to try and preserve increasingly non-existent U.S. dominance over the world, inevitably are going to lead to much worse outcomes for the U.S. than if our leaders had some common sense. But we'll keep fighting, and hopefully we will bring this nonsense to an end one of these days, hopefully sooner rather than later. All right, I will see you next time.